Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are at the midway point of the 2031 season. Our Wings are 46 and 35 through 81 games, 2 games behind the Mets in the National League East. We were leading the division until the last few days. We've lost 5 in a row at this point, unfortunately, which have moved us from first into third in the division. That said, we still are up 3.5 games for the fourth and final wild card spot in the National League, so we are not in a bad situation, even though our month of July is off to a bit of a slow start. In our last episode, we did the 2031 draft. Appreciate the thoughts on how we did in there. I feel like it was a pretty good draft. It wasn't perfect by any means. I don't think they ever are. But the fact that we were able to get 3 guys that we were thinking about taking in the first round in the first, second, and third rounds certainly is a victory. And if those guys develop to their full potential, they could all be pretty important impact players for us 5, 7, 9 years from now. So looking forward to that. And seeing how those guys develop over the next several years. We also traded away our, I don't want to say longtime closer, but a closer for us for a few years in Andres Munoz. He was out for the rest of this year with an injury. We are a win now team, and we also were in a situation where our salary situation for next year was not perfect, so getting rid of a reliever making $10 million made sense. Also brought on board Willy Adames to take over with Dansby Swanson as our starting shortstop in some type of platoon. Unfortunately, Adames is out for the next few weeks. He is in not the final year of his contract. He's actually got 2 more years left after this season, but we were able to have the Cubs retain 85% of his salary. He's certainly well overpaid at this stage in his career, almost 36 years old. Kind of best case scenario, he's an average-ish offensive major league player, driven largely by his home run power and ability to draw walks. Capable of playing a couple of positions in the infield. Hopefully next year in spring training we will get him trained up to play third base, which will help his versatility, but think that he could be a potentially useful utility guy for us the next few seasons. And then we also picked up Jared Kelnick to become our right fielder this year. Can see his numbers not great, but I do think that he should ultimately be better for us than the replacement level Rule 5 pick who had been manning right field for us for a good chunk of the season. So we've made a few moves already. With the departure of Munoz, we've actually opened up some money. So we've got close to $8 million to potentially bring on some talent over the next almost 4 weeks until we get to the trade deadline. We've got an offer out already, which I will revisit or visit actually for the first time with you, revisit for myself when we get a response from it, probably in the next day or two. It's to add a big impact player while having his current team retain a huge chunk of his salary. So I don't know that this offer is really going to go anywhere. But as I said, we are in win now mode. We don't want to sacrifice our top prospects, but if we can get rid of a second tier prospect for someone who can help us to win now, I think it's the right thing to try to do with these Buffalo Wings. And perhaps not surprisingly, we got a no way asking the Expos to keep 95% of Wander Franco's contract, offering them utility infielder Kyron Paris, decent-ish third base prospect in Josh Anderson, and a decent-ish minor league pitching prospect in Drew Graham. Felt like Franco is in the last year of his contract, so at some point the Expos are probably going to want to get rid of him, given that when we take a look at the standings here, they are last place in the NL East, and they have the worst record in baseball. So probably something that we'll continue to monitor over the next several weeks. Certainly if we could add Franco on a 2-month rental, I think he's a guy who could certainly help our offense over these last few months of the season. And we just got some bad time news with Adames already on the IL for another couple weeks. Dansby Swanson is going to be out with a strained oblique for 7 weeks. So the addition of him has not worked out in any way, shape, or form. He's had multiple injuries this year. His defensive ratings have fallen off the cliff. Just not the player that we thought we were getting. Guess the only positive thing is that his vesting option at this point, which requires 135 games, will not vest. So we will be moving on from Mr. Swanson at the end of this season. I guess with the length of his injury, perhaps he's a guy that we look to deal. Although, we should have him back by the end of August for the playoff push in September. But now we are in a situation where we desperately need a shortstop. We recently brought up Marcus Brown from AAA. He's a guy who we signed to a minor league contract, but view him as more of a utility infielder for us. Brought him up when Adames got hurt. Don't want to play him at shortstop given his ratings, and quite honestly, don't really want to play Deshaun Seifu at shortstop either given his ratings. So time to kind of see what is available on the trade market, and then obviously for the very near term, we're going to need to make a call to AAA Albany and figure out who's going to be playing shortstop for us. We've got a couple of options there. The two most obvious ones are Toshimitsu Kato, excellent defensive shortstop who just doesn't really have a major league bat, hitting 206 in 199 at-bats in Albany this year at the AAA level. And the other option would be to promote Tim Hull, 23-year-old former third-round draft pick in 2026. We're trying right now to train him up to be a first baseman. His bat is not completely developed. He is hitting 273 with 11 doubles and 7 homers in AAA for us. And with that 70 infield range, he may be the best option we have at shortstop over the near term. And quite honestly, if we bring him up and start playing him at shortstop, it's pretty unlikely that Adames or Swanson will take that job from him when they are back and healthy, unless Hull is just a total disaster, both at the plate and in the field, which, although he's not completely developed, I would not expect him to be a total disaster. And looking at the shortstops available on the trade block, we already tried to bring Wander Franco on board. Not that we would necessarily want to be playing him at short with that 55 range. There's a bunch of guys who are injured. I don't think Brendan Donovan is the answer with his 50 infield range. Brooks Lee could be okay, but making a lot of money in the last year of his contract. And then our former shortstop, Kevin Made, is out there. Certainly has the glove that would help us at the position, but has proven to be a unreliable major league bat. You can see over the last 3 seasons at the major league level, 212 with us, a $190 and a $196 the last 2 seasons in San Diego after we traded him away and moved on from him. And he's also fragile. So when I think about the options available, it's time to see what Tim Hull can do at the major league level. I think his development will hopefully continue playing every day in the majors. His contact and his gap power are fine. He's not going to walk a lot. He's not going to hit a lot of home runs. He will avoid strikeouts, has a little bit of speed, but that 70 infield range hopefully will prove useful for him at shortstop. Would love if those error and arm ratings were a little bit higher, but it is what it is at this point. But Tim Hull, because of the injuries, is going to get the promotion up to Buffalo, and he is going to be our everyday shortstop, and we'll start to see whether he can produce there for us. You may have noticed that the strategy, this isn't something I ever talk through all that often. I can't say that I never talk through it, but I do set strategy individually for individual players, but I generally don't set it in the minor leagues. I set it by the time they get to the major leagues. So he's a little below average in his ability to bunt for hit and sacrifice bunts. I don't generally do those that often anyways, but want him to be lower. He is really good at avoiding strikeouts, so from that perspective, probably can hit and run a little more often with him, in my view, especially given that I don't think he's going to be a big-time bat quite yet. And his speed, his stealing, and his base running are all a little bit above average. I'll tweak those up slightly and then override the team strategy settings. Obviously can change these down the line, but we are going to see what Mr. Hull can do as a major leaguer. And after that rough start to the month of July, which included a 6th straight loss, 5th in a row for the month of July on Saturday the 5th, we're now playing a bit better. We've won 4 of our last 5 right now. Still have a losing record on the month, but definitely not playing as horribly as when we were losing every game. Deshaun Seifu just had a monster game, 5-5 a couple days ago in an 8-2 victory over the Pirates. Singled in the first, RBI triple in the third, doubled in the fifth, singled in the seventh, and an RBI double in the eighth. So 5 for 5 with 2 singles, 2 doubles, and a triple is definitely a big performance by Mr. Seifu. And we've made it to the All-Star break with a 51-38 record. We are 4 games behind now in the division. The Mets on fire with 6 wins in a row, 9-1 over their last 10. So we're actually tied for second with the Nationals right now in the standings. As we hit the All-Star break, Deshaun Seifu leading the National League in stolen bases. Vance Honeycutt third in OPS. And Jarlin Susana is tied for second in the National League with his 10 wins, even though the ERA of 5.78 is not that impressive. Also time to find out who made the All-Star team for us this season. Looks like we have no pitchers on the All-Star team, and we have one of the better pitching staffs in the National League. So that is probably something that's going to be a bit insulting to some of our pitchers, and hopefully they will use it as motivation for this second half of the season with the poor year that he is having for us thus far. Looks like Adley Rutschman was not named an All-Star at catcher. Vance Honeycutt, All-Star in left field, 308 average, 16 homers, 21 steals. He has been having a really good year for us, and he is the only All-Star, our lone representative this year. So we've definitely struggled a bit, but we were leading the National League East most of the season. And when we take a look at our team statistics, we're tied for 6th in runs scored, but we are still 3rd in the National League in runs allowed. And you can see we are the top 3 or 4 in many pitching categories, and certainly in the top half of the league in everything except strikeouts. Our defense still doing well. So with a 51-38 record, and with the fact that at this All-Star break point of the season, we are 3.5 games up on a wild card spot to only have one All-Star definitely, hopefully, will be something that motivates these Buffalo Wings over the second half of the year. Good to see Honeycutt get recognized as an All-Star for a third consecutive season. But now this marks a second consecutive season for Deshaun Seifu, where he is not an All-Star. He was in 28 and 29, the 2 years that he won Gold Gloves, and the last 2 years he has not been an All-Star. So a little bit disappointing there. Not surprising that Adley Rutschman, not an All-Star with the poor season that he's had offensively for us so far. He still looks like the same player as I talked about in our last episode as far as his ratings. So definitely think that he should rebound from the 223 average and just 4 homers over the first half of the year. But with that really putrid offense that he's provided, he's barely been above replacement level despite his good defense. So he's been disappointing. And then Samuel Basallo, who had been a two-time All-Star for us, 2029 and 2030, each of the last 2 seasons, and has won Silver Sluggers in each of his 3 seasons in the majors. Having a little bit of a down year, 238 average, 16 homers. Basallo is not an All-Star this year either. Cam Collier, would have thought that he would have gotten some attention at third base, 2.6 WAR on the year, hitting close to 300, 22 doubles. Definitely feel as if the voting did not really go our way. Andrew Painter, 8-3 with a 3.56 ERA, probably had a case. Hayden Yinger, in what will be his last year with us, probably had a case. Bryce Miller, 2.06 ERA and 20 saves, even though he hasn't been our closer the whole season. So there are definitely some guys who can have some complaints about not being named to the All-Star team this year from Buffalo. And as I said, perhaps we'll be able to use that as some motivation over the rest of the year. And we've got some good news in that Willy Adames is ready to come off of the IL. He only played in 3 games for us with 8 at-bats, 2 home runs, and 4 ribbies before he got hurt, so he was very productive for us. That said, Tim Hull has also been productive, 10 for 30 over his first 8 games with 5 doubles, has driven in 6 runs, even stolen a couple of bases for us. So he's got a 126 WRC plus, almost or over half a win in terms of WAR, above replacement level. And looking at his fielding stats here, he has been above average in terms of his defensive efficiency and his zone rating. Not making a ton of plays each game, but it's obviously a pretty small sample size. But we're going to keep Hull as our starting shortstop at this point. So we will likely be sending Marcus Brown down to AAA. We will have to waive and DFA him to get him down there. Would like to be able to keep him in the organization, but we're going to bring Adames back up to be a utility infielder for us. And honestly, I think against left-handed pitching, we are going to get Adames into the lineup. We're going to start training him at the major league level at third base. We will move Cam Collier to right field, and then Kelnick, who is not particularly proficient against left-handed pitching, and he's also fragile. So our preference would be to start him only against right-handers. So we'll make those moves and see if perhaps we can move Marcus Brown back down to AAA without someone picking him up from us. And we've got about 10 days till the trade deadline now. We are alone in second place, 5 games behind the Mets, but the Mets are on fire, 10 wins in a row. Even though we are 7-3 over our last 10, we're still losing ground to the mighty Mets, who have the second best record in baseball behind only the Kansas City Royals right now. So although we're 5 behind the Mets, we are in the number 1 wild card slot in the National League right now, 3.5 up. So still feel like we are in a pretty good position to make the playoffs this year. Obviously would love to win the NL East and get that first round bye. But at the very least would love to have home field advantage for a wild card series, which is the position that we are in right now. Quick look at the leaderboard. Not that too much would have changed since the last time we checked in, but Seifu still leading the league in steals. And Jarlin Susana is now tied for the league lead in wins, despite that ugly 5.54 ERA. As we talked about in the previous episode, though, despite the 5.54 ERA, Susana's SIERA of 3.55, almost exactly 2 runs better than his ERA. He's winning games. He's striking out more than a batter per inning. The whip certainly is higher than ideal, with 34 walks and 96 hits allowed in 91 innings. But certainly when I look at his pitching ratings and when I look at his SIERA, not considering removing him from the rotation. And hopefully he will continue to pitch better over the last 2.5 months of this 2031 season for us. And with a week and a half until the trade deadline, kind of time to figure out whether we want to move on from Tim Hull. You can see that he's still hot. And he's only played a couple more games since the last time we checked in on him, but has raised the batting average to 361, hit another double, his first major league home run. I think the shortstop job is Tim Hull's for now and for the foreseeable future. Would still love to see those last 5 points of development that we think he has in contact, gap power, home run power, and eye to be realized. But at this point, he's not done anything to suggest that he's not the best realistic option we have at shortstop for the rest of this season. And as we close in at the trade deadline, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, we're in win now mode. And I've got a deal here. We're going to trade away the reliever Emerson Talavera, who's been solid and respectable for us the last 3 seasons. His first couple years with us, he was excellent. He's a decent relief pitcher, but his arbitration number next year is going to be over $3.5 million. And for a decent relief pitcher, I feel like that's starting to get a little bit aggressive. So we may have needed to move on from him this offseason anyways. We're going to get Luis Castillo in return, who is probably going to give us a pretty similar performance out of the bullpen. But what I do like about Castillo, he has obviously been a starter over the most part of his career. He throws a little harder than Talavera. He's got extreme ground ball tendencies and good movement on his pitches, so he doesn't give up as many home runs as Talavera. And he's a guy who can certainly start for us in a pinch. I think initially we're going to put him into the bullpen, but he will kind of be some insurance if we do have some injuries to the starting rotation as we get closer to the playoffs, or perhaps even in the playoffs. Certainly would feel comfortable sliding Castillo in as a 4th starter for us in the playoffs if we needed. He is a guy, if you remember well, we had with us briefly in 2028 when we made our first trip to the playoffs. He went 5-3 for us with a 4.08 ERA, so he wasn't great, but we're not even asking him to be an everyday starter for us at this point, more just an arm out of the pen. And potentially when we get to the playoffs, maybe he's fighting for a 4th spot in the rotation. But with the way that Ohtani has pitched this year and the fact that Painter and Yinger both having good years, he'd probably be taken over for Susana, who's leading the league in wins, or a Sean Sullivan, who at this point is probably the odd man out for the 4-man rotation that we'd use in the playoffs. So probably going to need 1 or possibly even 2 injuries to need to use Castillo as a starter. but I feel like he can help us now. They're looking for some big players or some big prospects to bring him back, but also would take Brandon Shumaki, 33 years old, fragile, just a guy who is in high A ball for us the last couple years, just giving us some experience in our minor league system, but certainly not a critical player for us. So we are going to add him into the deal. And it's actually going to free up some money for us because the Yankees actually had retained 100% of his salary when he went to the Mariners. So we'll get some money that we owe Talavera over the course of the rest of this season off of the books, improve our financial situation a little bit. I think we get a small upgrade in terms of our pitcher. We lose the optionality to bring Talavera back next year, but again, at the number he's likely to be making, I think that's a very borderline decision whether we'd want him back anyways, and this will free up some more money for us to attack free agency with potentially next year. So we are going to go ahead and complete the trade. Fans upset that Talavera is gone, but we still have fan interest of over 100. We will put Castillo right onto the roster. Marcus Brown has made it through waivers, so fortunately we still have his depth in the organization in AAA. And if you were looking closely, you may have noticed that we also had a trade offer out to Montreal and their general manager, Trish Raspberry. Still trying to pick up Wander Franco. He's in the final year of his deal. Think we could definitely put him at third base for us, and then that would let us move, at least for the rest of this season, Cam Collier to right field and bolster our offense a bit by likely moving Kelnick to becoming a potential pinch hitter for us. Have to give up Kyron Paris, which is fine. He's going to be a free agent after this year and isn't as good defensively as Adames is. So his roster spot next year is in jeopardy. Minor league reliever Julio Flores, who was our 9th round pick a year ago, hasn't made it above rookie ball at this point. And third baseman Josh Anderson, a middling prospect who was a 6th round pick back in 2029. But then to get the deal done, we have to add in either a big-time prospect in a Joe Edwards or a Dave Zapf or Deshaun Seifu or Cam Collier. That's if they're retaining 80% of his contract. So with the fact that we did just clear a little bit of money, we'll see if perhaps if we retain a bit less money, we can maybe throw in a lesser player. I don't think, even with us keeping 50% of his contract, that this is going to work. We're probably still going to have to add in a pretty big-time player. But it's not a long-term commitment on our end, and we're not losing anyone who's a big part of our future if we build a deal around these 3 guys. Doesn't mean we're going to be able to. They're probably going to come back and still ask for a pretty big-time player, even though we took the retention from 80% down to 50%. But at some point at 34-60, with the worst record in baseball, you would think that the Expos would just take whatever they could get for Wander Franco. And they've got different people that they're looking at to get the deal done, but still some of the top prospects in our system or one of the top players in our organization with Vance Honeycutt. So we'll discuss it again. Drop it down to just a 30% retention. I don't know how much lower we can realistically go than that. Obviously, we still have money to go. We could go as low as them only keeping 10% of his contract. But I'm not willing to go there quite yet. We'll see if they keep 30%, what their response looks like. And at 30% retention of Franco's contract, still looking for big time players or big time prospects. The one exception is Takao Ota, the 29-year-old first baseman. Fake name recently brought up the idea of us potentially trading away Ota before the trade deadline because he is a player who is going to be making about $7 million next year when he's arbitration eligible again, and he's got real good home run power, but he doesn't bring a lot else to bear. That said, he has been playing better of late. He's got his batting average up to 252, 15 home runs. And when I look at his ratings, particularly against right-handed pitchers with that 70 power, he's still a pretty important player for us this year. So as much as I would love to add a Wander Franco, I don't want to completely strip our lineup to do it. Certainly not going to add in a Honeycutt or a Tim Hull or Hardage, Jonathan Joy, Steve Anderson, Isidro Ochoa, some of the top prospects in our system, or Jorge Carrillo, one of the better young pitchers in our organization. So I'm going to go discuss the trade again, drop our retention down to 15%, and see if at some point we just have to throw in a more marginal prospect and can get this deal done. And it is kind of weird that Montreal's focus is building a dynasty when they are the worst team in baseball. That seems odd to me. And it looks like Wander Franco is off the table because he was traded to the Miami Marlins before Montreal could respond to our latest offer. Let's see what actually went down in that trade and what they actually got from him. He was traded to the Marlins along with catcher A.J. High, who looks like a okay prospect. Solid defensively. Question is whether he's going to ever hit enough at the major league level, but not a completely useless prospect. And they got back in return starting pitcher Chris Schultz, who's only a 2.5-star prospect, 20 years old. I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel like the prospects that we were offering were just as good as Schultz, but maybe I'm overrating the guys that we included. But to include a good catcher, or not a good, but a decent defensive catching prospect, A.J. High, along with Wander Franco, to get a very middling starting pitching prospect. He does throw in the mid to high 90s, but he very well could end up in the bullpen, and best case scenario to me looks like a 4th or 5th starter. I don't think the offer that we were making for Franco was incredibly impressive, but I don't think that offer was incredibly impressive either. So maybe it's just the trade difficulty that we are on working against us as the human player compared to what happens in a AI to AI trade, or perhaps I'm overrating what we were offering. And I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments. You know, Paris is obviously a replacement-ish level major league player. Julio Flores is clearly only a potential reliever, but I think arguably could be a decent reliever. And then Josh Anderson, again, is best case scenario, a replacement-ish level third baseman. So maybe, I guess the starting pitcher they got back is better than anyone that we were going to give them. But it doesn't seem like that was an overwhelming offer to Montreal, in my view, given that they kept requesting a huge prospect from us in addition to the package that we were giving them. I don't feel like, us adding in a Isidro Ochoa who is 3-2 with a 4.62 ERA in Double A this year, after being 7-3 with a 3.31 in High A ball, number 95 prospect in baseball. We had to add him into everything else we were doing to get the deal done. Seems like they were definitely asking more for us, more from us than they were asking for from Miami. But maybe I'm talking my own book. Maybe I'm not being objective. I'm sure you will let me know in the comments if you feel that way. And with moving on from the dream of adding Wander Franco, we've got another deal that I think we may do. We're going to give the utility infielder Kyren Paris, who's been our first baseman against left-handed pitching this year, and does have the ability to play multiple positions in the infield, as well as the minor league third baseman Josh Anderson, who he had been including in other deals, to pick up Austin Riley from the Mariners, who's a third baseman slash first baseman, also a right-handed hitter. So he would be an upgrade in terms of our first baseman against left-handed pitching. So certainly an obvious upgrade with the bat compared to Kyren Paris there. And it actually frees up some more money for us because the Braves have already retained 100% of his salary. Team option for $22 million for him next year, which we would be extremely unlikely to accept. No buyout on that, though. But I feel like it does help our offense a little bit. He's not as good defensively as Kyren Paris. Not that that's critical at first base, and quite honestly, with the fact that we've got Adames and we will eventually have Swanson back as utility infielders, just don't feel like we need Kyren Paris this year. Anderson is not a big-time prospect, and they're basically willing to just have us throw in anybody to get this deal done, which means they'll probably do it as is. And they'll complete it right like this, even though our assistant GM says he doesn't think he'll convince us to take it. So the way I look at it, Kyren Paris has been our first baseman against left-handed pitching this year. And we look at those ratings, 50, 55, 50, 60, 45. And we will be bringing on Austin Riley to be our first baseman against left-handed pitching, and his ratings there 55, 50, 60, 55, 40. Definitely a little more pop in the bat for us. Probably not going to be critical, but I think he's a little better, and we're not really giving up much. Paris, we're likely going to move on from this after this season anyways. Josh Anderson is not a big-time prospect. And I think we end up with someone who is a little bit better bat now. And even though he's not quite as effective against right-handed pitching, still has a little pop in his bat against right-handed pitching as well. So we're going to go ahead and complete that trade. Got enough leadership without Paris. Fans are happy to have Austin Riley on board. So fan interest still remains above 100 for us, and we've now freed up a fair amount of money with bringing on these guys whose teams are retaining 100% of their contract. It doesn't mean that we're going to have enough to bring on Josh Behar, but you may remember this was another, we thought he was a 5-star prospect at the time, but he's really only a 4.5-star prospect. A guy that we picked up in the 6th round because he was impossible to sign. Don't love him, but clearly if he really were to develop to have 65 contact and 65 home run power, he is a pretty useful offensive player who could be a corner outfielder down the line. I don't think we're going to have enough money to get him done now, but he's looking significantly over $14.5 million. We've got, with the moves that we've made, the ability to offer him close to $12.3 million. So it's probably not going to work, but it is an option for us to consider in August. to just throw some money at him and see if maybe we can get him locked up. But right now, I like the fact that we've got Austin Riley to become a utility infielder with us, platoon with Ota at first base, and potentially give us another bat with some pretty decent home run power in our lineup, because that's definitely a bit of a weakness of ours. And we've added a little more help to the bullpen. You may remember in our last episode, we noticed that our former pitcher, Adrian Morejon, was on the trade block. Looks like he actually got released, and nobody had picked him up. Padres released him on the 17th, and we just signed him to a minor league contract. We're going to put him right in AAA, although he actually signed, and we had him playing rookie ball, where he did a nice job for us, not surprisingly, allowing 2 hits while striking out 13 over 7 innings. But now we will go ahead and move him up to AAA Albany. Just another guy who's an insurance policy for us, proven left-handed reliever. Glad to have him in the organization as a little bit of depth, and we've had some huge games recently. Seifu with another 5-hit game. Double, single, double, double, single. So 5 for 6 to get his batting average up to 299. And then Vance Honeycutt in that 15-1 win hit for the cycle for us. So 2 guys, former draftees from our team, probably the 2 most successful draft picks that we've had in this playthrough so far. Both had monster games in that win against the Orioles yesterday. And with the moves that we've made now, I think we're getting to the point where there's not much else that we're going to be doing as we close in on the trade deadline. We've freed up a decent amount of money, and we've, as I talked about, we've added Luis Castillo, who could potentially be an arm who could start for us if we need. So definitely bolstered the depth of the back end of our rotation while bringing a good reliever onto our team. Lineup-wise, we upgraded at first base, bringing Austin Riley on board. We've turned shortstop over to Tim Hall. Not surprisingly, his batting average has dipped down to 278, but still an above-average offensive player while he's been in the majors. And looks like he's been an above-average defensive player, too, with his pretty good range in the infield. And then, as I just mentioned, we've also added Morejon into our pitching staff in AAA, if I could find him, unless okay, yeah, it looks like we're using him as a starter down there, which is fine, whatever, gets him some innings. So we've added ourselves a little bit more depth across our organization with the moves that we've made, and we've opened up some money while doing it. So as I mentioned, we're not going to be able to offer Josh Behar what he says he needs to sign with us, about $12.3 million. He says it's got to be significantly over 14.5. But it's always interesting to learn something about the game. Maybe there's a chance, even though we're a couple $1 million less, a guy picking up $12 million can get another pretty highly regarded prospect into our organization. And if not, we're going to have a good opportunity to be profitable this year when all is said and done. And we made it past the trade deadline and to the beginning of August. We are still second place in the National League East, 6.5 behind the Mets, who continue to play some excellent baseball. Good news is we are up 4 on the final wild card spot, so we would be hosting either the Reds or the Cubs if the season were to end today. Hopefully hopefully we can still chase down the Mets. 6.5 games is not going to be easy for us to overcome, but I like the moves that we've made. Our 59-43 record is now 2 worse than Pythagorean expectations, so there's an argument maybe we can play a little better. We still did end up with a winning record in July, despite that 0-5 start in the month. So that's a pretty good result. After that 0-5 start, we were 13-7 the rest of the month. So hopefully that's just a bad week, and we won't get into a situation like we did last year where we really faded in August and September. We now rank 3rd in the National League in runs scored, and we rank 2nd in the National League in runs allowed. We've got good defensive ratings for the team, and you can see we're basically in the top half of every offensive category at this point, except for walks, where we rank 14th. And we are in the top half of the league in every pitching category, and really among the top 3 in most pitching categories. And we're 3rd in defensive efficiency and 4th in zone ratings. So although at this point we are only a wild card team, as we've talked about, we're a win now team, and I think we are certainly poised to potentially be real competitive in the playoffs this year with the moves that we've made. We'll check in on the very early returns for some of our additions. Luis Castillo, 1 run allowed over 4 innings pitched with 5 strikeouts. So he has been fine for us as an insurance arm for our bullpen. Austin Riley, 1 for 3 with a double, hasn't started a game for us yet. Apparently we've been facing right-handed pitchers, but still think his bat off the bench could be pretty interesting for us. So glad to have him on board as well, even though we're not giving him the opportunity to play every day quite yet. And then Tim Hull, not surprisingly, his batting average continues to dip down to 262. Does have 9 doubles in just 65 at-bats, so he's been slamming the ball all over the gaps. Still hasn't improved those last 5 points that we think he has in contact, gap power, home run power, or average offensive player by every measure, perfectly average in terms of his offensive production, WAR of almost 1, thanks largely to his defense. His zone rating and defensive efficiency both still in positive territory as he has gotten a little more playing time with us as a major league shortstop. So maybe he's a guy who over the next few years will end the revolving door that we seem to have had in shortstop over the last several seasons. At one point, we thought Kevin Made was the answer. At one point, we thought Marcelo Meyer was the long-term solution. Coming into this year, we thought that Swanson would be our guy for this year and next. And none of that has really worked out as expected. So maybe it's time to go with somebody homegrown. Speaking of Dansby Swanson, still going to be injured for another 3 weeks. So he will be back towards the end of the month, hopefully. And otherwise, the team is relatively healthy. And hopefully we will stay that way in August and September and not deal with some of the serious injury issues that we had towards the end of last season. And in terms of the development that we're hoping to happen for Tim Hull, I think we're in a pretty good position with Joey DeMonte as our hitting coach. He's legendary in teaching hitting, outstanding with the development, excellent with mechanics. And you look at his relationships, and he's got an excellent relationship with Tim Hull. So hopefully that will result in, over the coming months and perhaps into next season, into hopefully realizing as much of the potential that we think he's got. Because certainly, if he's above average contact and gap power when all is said and done, and he's just below average in home run power and with that glove, he could definitely be our shortstop of the future. So as August begins, as I mentioned, 6.5 games behind the Mets. We'll find out how the pennant race goes over the next 2+ months in our next episode. Right now, although we're 6.5 behind the Mets, we'd still have the fourth best record in baseball. Kansas City and the Mets tied at number one, and then the Angels, who are 6 behind the Royals, and us, who are 6.5 behind the Mets, are the third and fourth best teams in baseball at this point. So we are both a little bit unlucky in that we happen to be playing in the division with the best teams in baseball. But that means, though, that the Angels up 5.5 for their wild card spot, and us up 4 on a wild card spot in the National League, are hopefully, at the very least, in a good position to make the playoffs. And we will find out if we get back into the playoffs for a fourth season in a row in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.